So in the last video, we viewed the clip of those little children being interviewed about expectations for gender. And as you saw, the kids in that video couldn't have been older than 3 or 4 years old. And at that early of an age, they already had very clear expectations about what was appropriate and inappropriate behavior for people based off their gender, right? The interviewers asked the children, if you were a boy, what would happen if you wore a dress to school? And the little kid said, all of the kids would make fun of me. They asked, is it okay for a boy to look like a girl? No. Is it okay for a girl to look like a boy? No way. Right? And from a very young age, these kids had very clear expectations about what was appropriate and inappropriate gender behavior. And then the end of the video, when the interviewers asked the children to point at either the woman doll or the man doll, and when they ask those questions, which doll stays home with the kids? And they all point towards the woman doll. Which doll goes to work? And they all point to the man doll, right? These kids were not born with that understanding, right? They weren't born with this innate or natural understanding that women should wear dresses and stay home and take care of the children, and men should wear pants and go to work and provide for their family. Those are behaviors and values that are learned through socialization, right? So how did those kids at the age of 3 or 4 come to internalize those ideas or those beliefs? Maybe they lived in a household where their father or the male figure in the household did go out and work and was the breadwinner for the family, and the wife was the one that, or the woman figure, was expected to stay home and take care of the children. Maybe they saw that behavior being emulated on cartoons that they watched as kids. Maybe they have a friend or another family member, and their family structure follows that stereotypical gendered mold, right? So we learn these behaviors from a young age, and we are heavily influenced by these agents of socialization that teach us the values and norms given the specific cultures or societies that we're a part of, okay? So I know this sounds a little intimidating, and again, this is going to ruffle feathers because we like to think we're individuals in our society, but some good news here: we are not prisoners of our socialization, right? We are heavily, heavily influenced by it, don't get me wrong. Agents of socialization are very powerful, especially in those early stages of self-development, like the imitation stage and the play stage example from needs taking the role of the other. Those early years of our self-development, when we develop our brains and start developing our self-concept of who we are very influential in the people that we become later in life. That's not to say we can't change who we are, though. Of course people can change, We can expose ourselves to new agents of socialization, right? Many of you now, as first-year college students, are in a very new environment. This year is likely going to be one of the most transformative years of your entire life. Because for many of you, this is the first time that you're potentially living in a different city. You're living in a very different environment. The expectations of you are drastically different than anything you've experienced before. You're being exposed to probably a lot more diversity, people from different backgrounds and different ways of life. You're taking courses like this, which are going to open your mind and challenge you to think in very new ways. Right, so all of those different agents of socialization, your professors, the new friends you're making, the new places that you're working, the new schools that you're attending, those agents of socialization are likely going to affect you and socialize you in new ways and help you develop a new or extended sense of self. So we're not prisoners to socialization, right? We get to choose which information that's presented to us we want to buy into or explore further, right? Just because I have friends that are, for example, that are Buddhist. It doesn't mean that I all of a sudden become a Buddhist just because of that. I've looked into it and I explore it, and I think it's interesting, and I learn more about it, and I adopt some of the principles of Buddhism in my own life that I think pertain to me. But that doesn't mean I've completely disregarded my self-identity as Catholic, which is the religion I was previously socialized into. So we're not prisoners to socialization. We still have autonomy as individuals and the ability to make decisions, but it's important to note that we are constantly being socialized. It is never a never-ending process. It never stops. So rather than being passive sponges in the socialization process, meaning that we just are constantly influenced and automatically endorse or support everything that's thrust upon us through these agents of socialization, we are actively involved in the construction of our sense of self. Another easy way to think about this is, do you share the exact same values and beliefs as everyone who shares your gender, or everyone who shares your race, or everyone who shares your religion? Of course not. And that's because we all have unique social locations, right? No two people are the same. No two people come from the exact same socialization, which is why we can have a number of women who, for example, support abortion and that are pro-choice, and many women who are pro-life and are against abortion, right? So just because you share a specific trait or share a specific aspect of your identity or your culture with other people doesn't mean that you're all going to think the same way or have the same belief system, because we all have unique intersections of our identities, unique social locations, and unique agents of socialization influencing the people that we become. So let's talk about a few different dimensions of socialization. We have anticipatory socialization, which refers to learning in advance the expectations or the norms or the behaviors and the practices of a certain role or status that we are going to have before we actually enter that particular environment. So an example of this would be little boys playing with tool sets, or little girls being taught to play with toy kitchens or dolls, anticipating those future roles that they might have. Boys working as construction workers, or girls being mothers, right, or being stay-at-home moms. Another example could be a high school student visiting a college before you apply. You want to do things to prepare yourself for roles or statuses that you expect you're going to have or anticipate that you're going to have in the future. And so to do that, you start getting into the swing or practicing the behaviors, the values, and the beliefs associated with that particular status or role that you're anticipating you will be socialized into in the future. There's also the process of re-socialization, which is learning the new norms, values, and behaviors that match your new situation in life. Like I said before, all of you, or many of you, especially if you're first-year students, are probably experiencing re-socialization right now, as you're getting socialized to understand what it's like to be a college student, which is a new status or a new role that many of you have not experienced before. Other examples of re-socialization could be a woman becoming a nun, right? You're obviously going to have to learn a very new system of norms, values, and behaviors, going from being a woman to being a woman of God in this instance. Also, a person going through a divorce, right? If you had been socialized and had experienced your life as the status of a married person for many years, and all of a sudden your marriage dissolves and you break up, you're going to have to re-socialize yourself. What is it like to be a single person today, right? Especially empathize with people that are, maybe 40, 50, 60 years old and getting a divorce. The dating scene for single people has changed drastically over the past couple of decades, right? Things like Tinder, right? And Bumble. I never used any of the dating apps, but, think about how differently and how virtual and online dating things are today, or especially now dating in the era of COVID-19. What does that look like to pursue someone in this era where we're socially distancing and taught to avoid social contact with other humans? Think about the re-socialization that would need to take place in that context. And then there's also total institutions, which are places that totally cut people off from the rest of society, and those people in total institutions succumb to total control from the officials that are in charge. So examples of entering a total institution could be a cadet entering the boot camp, right? We have the Naval Air Station here, entering the Navy, the Armed Forces. You really give up your individuality. You're told to take off your clothes. You need to wear a specific uniform. Meals are served at these times of the day. You need to get up at this time of the day. You have a very regimented schedule. You lose a lot of your individual freedom in a total institution, and you're kind of broken down to the point where you can be built up again almost from scratch. Another example could be a patient admitted to a mental health facility. Patients need to wear certain robes so they can be identified by the workers. Again, on a very regimented schedule. They can't just go in and out of the building as they please, etc. So let's think about a few more examples of this. How might a person sentenced to time in prison experience anticipatory socialization, re-socialization, and a total institution? If you'd like, you can pause the video here and reflect on this question for a few minutes before resuming. So ways in which a person sentenced to prison might engage in anticipatory socialization. So I know if I, God forbid, knock on wood, never will happen, but if I ever got sentenced to do some serious time in prison, I would engage in a lot of anticipatory socialization. I would start researching what it's like to be incarcerated. I would try and learn lingo that's associated with prison life. I would probably start working out a lot more, build up my muscles so I feel like I can protect myself inside. I would start researching, what resources are available in the prison that I'm going to know what I can expect to do with my free time, etc. So all of those behaviors, I would start learning about the norms, the way of life inside that prison, and start engaging in those behaviors before I actually get incarcerated would be anticipatory socialization. Resocialization that I would experience entering prison, right? Well, this kind of goes hand in hand with it being a total institution. I would be in a completely new social environment with a completely new set of norms, behaviors, and values attached to it. So I would literally have to re-socialize myself into this new environment, right? I'd have to get used to waking up on a set schedule, having my meals fed to me at a set time, having severe limitations to my freedom and the things I'm able to do with my free time, right? And along with that being in a total institution, I couldn't wear my colorful clothing, my colorful wardrobe that I've grown accustomed to wearing over the past years. I couldn't have the freedom to cook. I'd have to listen to my superiors and do exactly what I'm told to do out of fear of repercussions. So the last things we'll talk about are statuses and roles. So the way we get socialized, right, we learn these different behaviors in our society helps us fit into certain statuses and role expectations that we have as a member of any given society that we're a part of. So a status refers to a position someone occupies in a group or society that carries with it certain responsibilities and expectations. So things like being a college student, a daughter, an Asian American, an astronaut, even a bank robber. Those are all statuses that people can occupy. Now, typically we organize statuses into two groups, either ascribed statuses, which are involuntary, meaning we are often born into those statuses, or they're statuses that we don't really have control over. Things like, for example, being a daughter or being an Asian American. And then we also have achieved statuses, which are voluntary statuses, or the statuses that we can earn or accomplish or obtain through our own efforts. So, for example, becoming a college student is an achieved status. You work towards this status. Becoming an astronaut would again be an achieved status, something you'd have to work towards to obtain. Even being a bank robber, right? That's something, a status that you obtain through your own individual efforts, okay? What are some ascribed statuses and achieved statuses you have? If you'd like, you can pause the video here again and think of some examples from your own experience. A few other things about status. Everyone occupies several different statuses, but we all have one master status, which is the status that cuts across all of our other statuses and becomes the primary status others use to identify who you are as a person. So it's not necessarily what we as an individual think is our most important status, but rather it's what others consider to be our most important status. So for example, my status of being a dog owner and a donut connoisseur are very important to me. Those are things I take very seriously in my life, my dogs and my donut consumption. However, my statuses of being a man or of being a college professor are likely the primary statuses that other people use to frame the way they interact with me, right? So another way to think of a master status is, what's the status, the main status that most people probably use to guide how they're going to interact with you in any given context, right? So in the classroom setting, my master status is probably that of being a professor. It really is the main factor that affects the way students interact with me in that particular environment. However, when I'm just Daniel walking down the street, my status of being a man is probably the master status, affecting the way people come up and interact with me, right? Race is something that can also be a master status, how that affects how people interact with one another. It's also important to know that an individual's master status can change over time, and it can also change in different contexts. For the sake of time, I'm going to pause the video here, and I'll pick up with one more final brief video just to cover this last concept of roles.